So taking a step towards the philosophical, I think your contribution to the sport is absolutely incredible. You know, you stimulate such great conversation, you bring on great guests. What do you think your legacy is that you are leaving and want to leave? What's your unique gift?
That is a very good question. I don't know if I have a unique gift necessarily, but I have some strengths and I have some weaknesses, and I'm quite aware of what both of those are, and I try to make the most of the strengths, of course, and mitigate my weaknesses either by working with other people that know these things better than I do, and for example aerodynamics that I'm doing right now, or just making them non-factors.
Welcome to the Run Form Podcast. I'm Bobby McGee, running mechanics expert.
And I'm Matt Pendola, your run-specific strength coach.
Matt and I have been working together for almost a decade on some of the top athletes in the world, and we've decided to share that process with you guys. Hey Matt, good to see you again. Pretty exciting podcast this time because we have our first guest.
I know, I don't know how we convinced him to come on, but I'm glad he's here. No, but we're really excited to have Michael on. I was actually on his That Triathlon Show podcast recently and had a lot of fun with it. And I thought, hey, what if we flip the script here and have him come on instead? So I know it's going to be a lot of fun answering some good questions today. We'll get into Michael's background and why we have him on in the first place.
Yep, if you're a fan and if you're a triathlete and if you love the sport and you're a triathlon geek, there really is only one podcast to listen to, right? And that's That Triathlon Show with Mikael Eriksson. So it's my go-to whenever I exercise, and messes my exercise around because I have to stop and make notes. You know?
Nervous myself just being on his podcast, and he was laughing because he said it's always weird to me somebody's such a fan. But yeah, I've gotten so much valuable information from That Triathlon Show. I highly recommend people listen to it, especially if you like to geek out a little bit. So it's a lot of fun. Like I say, we'll flip the script and have him on the other end, see if he can get some good answers out to our audience. And good to have you on, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's really great to be here, and yeah, we had a lot of fun recently, Matt, and also not to forget that Bobby has also been on That Triathlon Show. That was back in episode 200 something. I think we just established that it was early 2020 that we did that interview.
Correct. Before the whole world went nuts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to steal the Finnish gentleman's words, and I'm going to say, without further ado, let's jump in. Okay. So Michael, why don't you just do a little introduction? I mean, obviously we big fans, but love to just hear you from afresh introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm Mikael Eriksson. I am a triathlon coach foremost, but I also have a podcast, as you have said here. That's Triathlon Show, and I live in Lisbon, Portugal since 2017, late 2017. I am from Finland originally, but I did live in Helsinki for about 7 years probably, and went to university there and worked there in the kind of medtech industry for a while I was, I guess, starting to coach as well on the side as a bit of a side hustle. And then I decided that I wanted to try to do it full time. And at that point, I decided that I might as well move someplace warmer where I can train outside year round. And I ended up in Lisbon, and having actually never visited Portugal before.
No, fantastic. You know, it's always fascinated me since the 80s. I was a big fan of the big battle between Sebastian Coe and Steve Ovett. And there was a lot of talk in those days is how do middle distance runners and endurance runners that come from these climates that don't necessarily support endurance events get into the sport. And being up in Finland, Helsinki, and these places, I mean, there can't be a lot of time during the year where you can ride your bike outside and go for an uncluttered run.
No, especially the bike is the really difficult one. I'm trying to remember. It feels like such a long time ago, but I think usually in April is when you start to go out on the roads again, and then it can still be a bit annoying because you have lots of loose rock and sand on the roads, and you get lots of punctures those early weeks and months, and then you can stay kind of until October, I think, but you always have to be dress well. Even you might have a really cold days even in summer, some from time to time. So I think it's maybe not as bad, especially these days when you have indoor trainers and Swift and everything. You can definitely, as long as you find a way to enjoy that kind of training, I think it's not all bad. But of course, it's more fun to be outdoors, and just for the pure enjoyment of the sport, I do like to be in a place where I can go outdoors every single weekend of the year if I want to.
Good, yep. And also with most of the races being in hotter climates, it's probably better to live in a warmer climate.
That is actually a really good point. Yeah, I definitely think that there's something to that.
Yeah, because I'm okay with the long course guys training indoors, but when you have these, skill events, you look at people like, Christian Blumenfeld, and you look at Jakob Ingebrigtsen and these guys. I mean, they had to do skill stuff. You have to run really, really fast in cold climates, and the same with the bike. That I wonder if it's the tough environment that makes them such good athletes, that they just have to go to such ends to get it done.
I think that there's something to that, but I guess everybody's a bit individual. I believe in what makes them tick, and I think that maybe in a country like Norway with Ingebrigtsen and Blumenfeld and the likes, I guess it favors maybe the kind of athlete that has to have that bit of a, I guess, more really gritty attitude, kind of like I also see a lot from the UK triathletes coming through. And then if we look at a country like France, especially on the short course triathlon scene, everybody seems so skillful, so super smooth in their technique and everything they're doing in the water, on the run, and on the bike. And it's just a different type of athlete. And I think probably also just because of the culture of the different countries and the way that athlete trains in those countries. So it's a bit of nature and nurture, I guess, that combine there. But maybe one type of athlete that would have success in, let's say, France or Spain doesn't have as much success in Norway or Finland, and another type of athlete that would have success in Norway and Finland doesn't have the same type of success in France and Spain. I really don't know, but it would be interesting if somebody would look into that and do some research study on it.
I don't think we have to look any further than the Rocky montage guys. Rocky IV, come on, he trained outdoors. Drago was training inside. Rocky got robust. I mean, the rest is history, right?
No, that's true. And before the research, before the surge of African runners, the Finns had an unbelievable history in distance running, right? They had the big superstars in the early 19th century.
Yeah, the Flying Finns, and I think that they are some of the, even something like interval training has to some extent, I believe, been attributed to them as being almost pioneers in starting to do interval training. But so I think some of their interval training was even just kind of walking and running in the woods, and but then also just a more typical what we refer to as interval running these days, with faster bouts of running interspersed with walking or slower running. So definitely Finland has a big endurance sports history and cross country skiing as well. We've obviously had a lot of success there, not as much in the last decade or two as when I was a kid in the 90s. We had a lot of success, not all of it clean, unfortunately. But there is an endurance sport history in Finland for sure.
Okay. I'm going to completely change direction now, because I understood from, I think, a recent podcast or something that you're getting married soon, or you just got married.
Yeah, getting married soon, the 1st of July. So, coming 1 month and 1 week, I believe, at the time of this recording.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. That's pretty exciting. That's exciting. And she knows you as an endurance coach and as an endurance athlete, so she knows the lifestyle, right?
Yeah, it's not. It is known, yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So, just for people that don't know, your name is spelled with a K, but even back home, is it pronounced Michael, or is it Mikael, or something like that?
What you said is quite close to how the Finns would say it.
Okay.
In my native Swedish, it's the emphasis is on the E sound, so Mikael.
Okay. Very cool. So you were right, Matt. You were much closer to how it should have been pronounced. So that's good.
Yeah.
This is something I think of every time I listen to you. With the variety, the eclectic nature of your guests, right? Sometimes it's athletes, mostly it's scientists or coaches. You know, with your background as well, you have a deep understanding of sports science and exercise physiology. How does that knowledge that you're getting from all those guests, because, you know, you need to be a very particular kind of individual to engage individuals that have that level of specific knowledge and expertise. How does that impact your own coaching when you're working with an age group athlete, or even, I don't know if you coach any pros?
A couple of them I do. There's a mix with about 75% age groupers and 25% pros. How it impacts me? Well, it really is. It's hard to attribute anything that I do to a single, let's say, interview or individual. There are definitely some things. There are some workouts that I give. Now I'm just remembering one athlete that I prescribed a certain type of workout today, and that is definitely something I learned from one of my guests or from his scientific studies, and then I interviewed him about them. So there are some things that I can attribute directly to a certain person, but a lot of it is just almost like I'm letting things simmer in my head for a while, and then I assimilate a lot of knowledge and form my own blend of all of the information, if that makes sense. And there are definitely some times that I try out something specific, a specific intervention or a specific workout, but more often than not, I would say that I definitely have my own style, but it is of course influenced by a huge number of different inputs, including but not limited to some of the interviews that I'm doing. I do try to not have knee-jerk reactions though, and just because I did a really exciting interview, go and immediately try to implement those things. I try to give myself a bit of a buffer. I usually try to aim for 1 month that I'm not taking any action on anything, and then if it's still a good idea after 1 month, then it has matured enough that I think that okay, let's try it now.
Oh, fantastic! I think that's good discipline. That's typical Northern European discipline right there. Yeah, we have a fantastic world-class resource, a PT by the name of John Hodges that we refer to a lot. And whenever a new modality comes out in physical therapy, he has an interesting rule of thumb. Matt, why don't you just share that with us?
Yeah, well, when you look at with a guy like John, always having new case studies coming out and new things that we can look at, it can get overwhelming. Also, we get excited, right? It's like a new tool in the toolbox we can use. And I think the big thing is that we want to test and retest. And similar to like you were saying before, Mikael, is that we're going to look at potentially as coaches what it is that we want to implement, maybe doing that beta testing even within ourselves for a while, see how that simmers. And I think that long term, really understanding what's in the box is the most important thing. So it can be sometimes a good couple of years before I really start to implement certain ideas, especially if there are things that I think are a little bit more quote unquote cutting edge. And then we realize over time that there was just a lot of hype, a lot of influence versus the actual education. So I often refer to guys like John Hodges or Dr. Albertson. She's another sports doc I work with, getting their input, but also just getting the best current data from what we know and what we can understand, and then seeing how does this actually translate with the real world with our athletes. I know as a younger coach, I certainly would get a little bit, I think, overzealous, overexcited about a new idea. Like, oh, geez, we got to do that now. And then you realize that maybe you took a couple steps forward when maybe it should have been a step back, actually, to see how this is actually working over time. Yeah, any thoughts on that, Mikael?
Well, I can definitely sign off on been there, done that with maybe implementing things a bit too early. I think that's I agree with all of that, and I also, that's a good point you make there with trying it out on yourself first. That's something that I do a lot in my training. I'm I guess less ambitious as an athlete, or I know I'm much less ambitious as an athlete than I am as a coach. But I'm a perfect guinea pig and test lab to try out some stuff and see see what works and what doesn't for me. And I definitely don't take that as the final answer for everybody or anything like that. But at least it gives me some initial indications, and I can use that to see how quickly I want or don't want to implement something new that I learned.
Yeah, talking about being ambitious as a coach, do you sometimes fantasize about finding the next Eden or Yee or Nib or Duffy?
Yeah, that would be fun. I mean, absolutely. I wouldn't say no to that. I definitely think that in terms of, and I guess maybe that blends a little bit into another question that I know you have on the list there, but I think that if we're talking about short course stars, then that's also, there are some more downsides to that, I think, compared to long course, in that you might get a bit involved in the politics of federations and so on, that sometimes, or you don't necessarily have to get too involved in it, but I've heard from a lot of coaches that sometimes that does happen, and that's something that I think I can live without, to be honest. So I guess I would, if I had to choose, I would find the next star in long course triathlon, just because that keeps things a bit simpler from that perspective.
Okay, so you don't have this burning desire to have an Olympic medalist. That's enough of a deterrent because of all the politics.
Yeah, I think, yes, it is, to be honest. I do think that the Olympics is amazing, and I think it's the biggest thing in triathlon. For me, it's bigger than Kona, and I love watching it as a spectator. But it is a pretty big deterrent. I've heard some things from that world that I really don't want to risk getting involved with just the politics of it all. It's nothing like terrible or anything like that I'm talking about. It just seems like you're not in control of your own destiny necessarily always as an athlete or as a coach. You have others that can pull the reins and steer you in whichever direction. So that's just what I'm talking about, basically.
Yeah. When I was somewhat younger, I got 2 invitations, actually 3 invitations, but 2 from the same country, to look at the position of national team coach, and both of those I turned down for that same reason. But the wording that I used in those interactions with the federations was, if the coach does not have a milieu control, then it's pointless taking on a job like that, because you just set up for failure. But I was hoping with your talent in avoiding controversy in your podcast, and there's been a lot of controversy in podcasts of late, of course, right? But in avoiding controversy, that you didn't maybe see yourself as a figure that could take a step towards stopping all this nonsense, cutting out the bullshit and getting to the practical part of coaching that incredible sport, which is, ITU racing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And of course, there are coaches like Paulo Sousa or Joel Filial that have their own private squads, and of course, the athletes are still subject to what the federation decides in a certain sense. But as a coach, in that scenario, you can stay a bit out of it all. And I guess that is a scenario that would be much more appealing to me if I were to go down that path with the Olympics, having a private squad rather than working for a federation. And but yeah, with what you mentioned about the podcast, I think the thing there is that I'm in control of full control of my own podcast, and who I invite, what I talk about. Well, I guess somebody can start talking about whatever they want on the podcast, but if it's something very controversial, I can always not release that episode, and it has never happened, because I just vet the guests, and the topics that I'm interested in talking about are generally not very controversial. A lot of the topics, the first part of the answer is always it depends, right? So I think that honestly the biggest part to not having controversy in the podcast is that I have the type of guests that are generally not involved in that type of thing.
Okay. So with long course coaching having such a predilection for being remote, what do you prefer? Do you like remote coaching, or do you like hands-on coaching? I see you do a number of camps and things which look fascinating.
Yeah, I do love doing the camps, and I love to meet up with my athletes whenever I can. Of course, there are lots of opportunities when going to races and things, even if it's not a dedicated camp, but at least getting to meet athletes face to face, and I definitely try to make use of that opportunity. So I do like that. I like the combination, to be honest, of both of them. I think there's definitely something that could be said for having a performance environment where the athlete is there every day and the coach is there every day. But I also think that the way that I work, I have a very close relationship with my athletes, and I'm communicating with them a lot. So I think that I can, it works pretty well the way I do it with, and it allows me, I think, to also do things that maybe I couldn't do if I had athletes around all the time, like spend some time learning about new things, reading papers, talking with interesting people that I then publish on the podcast normally, but that kind of thing might not be possible if you're coaching in that kind of daily training environment. So there are advantages to the remote setting as well.
Unbelievably time consuming. I've spent a large portion of my career, watching other coaches in their daily training environments, and especially in triathlon, if you look at the logistical organizational demands on the coach, it's phenomenal. It just has to be a team approach. And then, of course, and that'll lead me to my next question, the economics of the whole thing come into play. So, I was going to ask you, what do you find more gratifying, the coaching or the podcasting? And let's start with that, and then I'll just lead into that next question.
Yeah, I mean, the coaching, without a doubt, the podcast is super fun, but but coaching is my main thing. That's I'm a coach, not a podcaster. I'm a coach that has a podcast. Is the way I view myself. So that's the number one thing.
Okay. And then in terms of working a lot for a nation that doesn't have governmental support of Olympic sports, draft legal triathlon in the US is a costly business with not a lot of income potential. How do you distribute, and feel free to go as deep with this as you want to go, but how do you generate your income most effectively with the various seats that you sit in?
Yeah, so the main income is from two main sources of income would be the coaching, and then I also have developed some ready-made training plans that are quite popular for athletes that aren't yet ready to commit to an individual coach, but they want to benefit more from structured training, and a lot of athletes, or all athletes that I'm getting feedback from at least, seem to be having good success with those ready-made training plans. So those are the two main sources, and a lot of listeners will be aware that I have sponsors on my podcast, and that's nice because it covers the cost of creating the podcast. There are quite a few costs that I have associated with it, and it does leave a bit of pocket money, let's say, on the side as well, but it's not a huge income stream. So financially, the podcast is maybe not it's not important for me, and I could stop doing it, and I wouldn't suffer financially for it. I would have a lot more time, but of course it is really important for me because it is a great tool for me to chat with really knowledgeable people and keep educating myself. And of course it also brings more visibility to scientific triathlon as a brand. People find, a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people find us through the podcast. So it is kind of a marketing tool in that sense, even though that's not why I created it in the first place.
Excellent. Great to hear that. That was a much more insightful answer than I would have been able to give myself. So that's incredibly useful. In terms of, and I think this is quite an easy question to answer, right? You prefer to coach age groupers and pros rather than either or. And that sort of fits in with the question of being a full-time hands-on coach, I guess.
Well, that's an interesting one. Yes, I do actually. I wouldn't say that that's the reason that I currently have, both age groupers and pro, or it's not as if I have an option right now because I haven't had, hundreds of pros knocking on my door to coach them. So even if I wanted to only coach pros, I wouldn't do that at the moment, at least. But I know that that's what I always will want to do, to combine working with both age groupers and pros for several reasons. I think everybody is a unique challenge, and there's something equally fun about the challenge of trying to make the most of somebody that has 6-7 hours a week to train as somebody who has 26-27 hours to train. And also, I think in terms of time commitment, it is a nice balance, because the athletes that are the most time consuming to work with are without a doubt the professionals. And so having a balance of age groupers and pros, of course I put a lot of time into my age groupers as well, but if I had all of my athletes be pros, then I would be working many very long evenings, I think.
Fair enough. So if we removed the politics, let's say there was a successful breakaway league that was just full-time draft legal sprint, Olympic distance, mixed relay, super sprint athletes, which would you then prefer to coach if there weren't any of the other differences?
Let's put it like this: if the Olympics wasn't subject to any of the politics and drama, then I think that I would be tempted by the Olympics. But also, if I'm being completely honest, I don't necessarily think that I have the same. At least right now, I would have to kind of learn to coach at that level, because right now I wouldn't feel confident that I'm at the level required as a coach to coach that kind of performance, just because I haven't competed at that level or near that level. And I haven't really been too involved in that scene. So I think that, but in a hypothetical scenario where I had the same knowledge, then I would be tempted by the Olympics, and without all of the politics, let's say.
Fantastic. Yeah, I grew up with track and field, right? So Olympics was always attractive to me, and the cut and thrust of Olympic distance racing. I remember being a long course athlete myself, but enjoying the short distance races, the non-draft short distance races way more, and I could race them every weekend and stuff like that. And when they went across to draft legal, I was with everybody else saying, "Oh, it's a different sport. It's terrible. It's really going to spoil the sport." But now I just find myself so much drawn to draft legal racing. It's just so exciting to me to watch and to work with, and the skill and the tactical component is also huge. So anyway, I belabor a point, but that's why I asked. The specific point that comes to mind, and it's been drifting around in my head for probably over a year now, was the kind of breakthrough understanding that Sebastian Weber brought to this VLA Max conversation. And I've always wanted to just ask you, when that conversation started becoming highly relevant, what was your first? When did you first learn about that, and what would your brief summary be to a complete beginner coach of long course athletes in that regard?
Yeah, that's a very hot topic. That's maybe even you could say controversial. Not quite controversial, I guess. But so the brief summary of what it is that you have we're all familiar with VO2 max, generally speaking. That's your maximum aerobic capacity. How much oxygen can your body process to create metabolic energy? And similarly to that, you have your VLA max, which is your maximum glycolytic capacity. So through the glycolytic energy system, how much energy can you create? How much energy flux can you create? So this can be this is hard to measure. It can only, the ways to measure it that have been suggested are, one of them is to use blood lactate, but the problem with that is that you're measuring lactate from the bloodstream rather than intramuscularly, and we're actually, the way that the VLA max works in the models that have been proposed, where VLA max really determines or helps determine alongside VO2 max something like your maximum lactate steady state or your quote-unquote threshold, that is based on an intramuscular model, and it's actually even more so, it's based on I believe, single cell model originally in the work by Aloy Mader. So anyway, VLA max has recently been popular because of the interest in establishing a threshold based on the combination of VLA max and VO2 max. That's one of the aspects, but also the interest in calculating carbohydrate and fat oxidation at different intensities based on these models. I guess for me, the thing that the more I've studied it and read up on it, the more I see that, well, it's not really been validated at all. They are interesting models, but they are based on single cell physiology and actually validating. There has been, I think, one study that tried to validate the inside software that uses these concepts, but that was only for, as far as I recall, the VO2 max component of it. It wasn't about the threshold and the fat and carb oxidation rates. So now I'm losing your original question, actually, but maybe I got most of the parts of it.
No, you definitely, I kind of want to carry on down that conversation, right? Because I'm furiously making notes here of your definitions versus what your guests and your experts have spoken about that. So I love that answer. It actually covers what we need, right? I started studying exercise science in the 70s, and things have grown exponentially, obviously, since then. But it does make it interesting. We get back to Matt and I's world, where you go, do you, when you're designing a training plan, look at things like, this person's physiology seems quite well adapted, but they are unable to get it into the bike or into the swim or into the run, right? Do you distinguish between peripheral function, leg function, arm function, with some of your workouts versus just training up the physiology or the metabolism?
Yes, definitely. But I would also say that this is an area where I can absolutely improve. And this is where, well, both of you have taught me a lot. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited that you have just recently started this podcast, because I think that in this area, there is a lot that I can learn. But yes, I do. For sure, the main thing that comes to mind is just with swim technique, is where an athlete can be very fit, but they're not very fast just because their technique is not good. So that's a pretty easy one, not an easy one to correct by any means, but an easy one to establish whether an athlete does not have good technique. So if I can, I try to obviously see an athlete swim in person when I'm with them in person, or get video from them, and try to work from that. The one thing that I'm really interested in at the moment, probably more interested than anything else, is aerodynamics on the bike. So for long course triathlon specifically, and working with an expert and friend, and learning a lot from him on that. And this is also a place where I definitely am less and less interested in, I'm not, it's not that I'm not interested in power, but now I definitely have more of a balance in the bike workouts, where there are some workouts where I tell the athletes to only care about your speed that you're producing, and try to do changes to maximize your speed. Don't worry about what your power is, because we want to make you faster, not necessarily. You don't have to be more powerful as long as you become faster. Running wise, I think there are lots of things that I like to implement, like running hill sprints, or hill strides, gym work, and so on. But running is the area where I generally don't ask my athletes for videos to correct, and that I would probably do that if I was working with more beginner athletes, but with most of my athletes are at least intermediate to advanced, or even some pros. So I don't feel like I am good. Like, I don't have the expertise to give feedback on, like, this is something that you should try to work on in your running form. But I do try to give them the tools, both through the training with using terrain like hills, and using strength training, and the same thing really is true on the bike and in the pool as well. In the pool, using tools to isolate certain parts of the stroke, and on the bike, using things like low cadence work. It is something that I'm using less these days, but it is something that every once in a while I come across an athlete where I see that there's a clear disconnect between their central physiology and their peripheral physiology on the bike, and that's where I tend to at least give it a try with the low cadence work, and see if that can be a key to them being able to express their full fitness on the bike. So I guess the answer is yes, but there's still lots of ground to cover there and work on and get better at.
Okay. Yeah, I remember wonderful conversations with Dean Golich from Carmichael Training Systems when he was talking about the metabolic cost of going slightly faster on the bike if you don't massively address aerodynamics. And the beautiful part of that conversation to me is that in cycling, in time trialing, aerodynamics is everything, right? And then in triathlon, aerodynamics doesn't quite go to that high profile because it also then plays a role in posture, right? So if you are super aerodynamic on the bike, it's likely that you're negatively impacting your run because of that. And if you look in the old days, you look at individuals like Mark Allen or Dave Scott that were terrible in terms of being aerodynamic on the bike, and the bikes were not very aerodynamic and so on. And you wonder if that's why they ran so fast, because the bike didn't take so much out of them. Obviously, they went considerably slower on the bikes. It's a fascinating conversation. I remember the year that Faris Al Sultan set the bike course record in Kona, but ran appallingly. And then the next year, he was less aggressive on the bike, probably more aerodynamic, slightly slower time on the bike, but ran considerably faster. And I think he ended up winning that year.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There is that balance, and even something like swimming and running are kind of the opposite to each other in terms of things like ankle flexibility that is good for one, bad for the other. Maybe even to some extent your anthropometry and things like that. So triathlon is fascinating from that perspective, that you always have to balance the three disciplines, and it is really hard to do that. And sometimes it is a bit of trial and error. You have to fail once and then learn from it and do it right the next time.
Yeah, one of the great Aussie athletes from the 90s, Craig Walton, always said to me that triathlon is a mongrel sport, right? You can find a way to get 30 seconds faster on the run, but you're going to lose 2 minutes on the bike. So it's a fascinating game to play in that regard. So, you said you kind of game, you're not so massively interested in your own performance. But, what level do you perform at, and what level do you aspire to perform at? Talk a little bit about your own training and your own participation in triathlon.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just love to be active, and I love to train. So I'm sure that one day I will keep being a triathlon coach, but I might stop doing triathlon myself. But then I will probably be doing something different, like trail running or something like that. I'll definitely always keep active, and I do love endurance sports. So that's probably something I will always be involved in. But right now I'm still enjoying triathlon a lot and doing it. And I guess I have two results that I am the most proud of, and one is a 4:01 half distance triathlon. Just nothing spectacular, which is why I don't really talk about my own training and racing on the podcast, because I know there is nothing spectacular. But it's not slow, so I'm happy with it. For me, it's a good result. I think that was the Portuguese National Championships that year for the half distance, and I think I was 6th in that category. So in the elite category, that is, there were a couple of Spanish athletes that participated faster than me, but obviously they were not eligible for the Portuguese National Championships. And the other one that I'm happy with is my 2:42 marathon, where I actually know that I didn't have the best preparation or even race execution, but that was mostly because of the preparation. So I think that for the marathon, I definitely want to go for a sub 2:40 one day, but I could possibly get to a 2:35 if I give it enough time, enough years. For the triathlon part, I would like to get a national championship podium in either the half or the full distance, and I actually have the full distance national championships is coming up in a few weeks. So let's see how that goes. I haven't participated in that race before, so I don't really know exactly what to expect. But I do think that generally here in Portugal, the level is slightly less competitive on the full distance than the half distance. So there might be an opportunity there.
Oh, okay. Well, Portugal is known for having amazing triathletes anyway, so the competition standard is quite high. People always say it.
Yeah, I should say there that the very best triathletes are not generally participating in these national championships for the half and the full distance because they are busy doing an Ironman race or something like that. So we do have some pro athletes that come and do these races, at least the half distance one, maybe not the full distance one, but not the very top ones. You don't. They might actually show up for the half distance race every once in a while, but not all of them. And so it's not as if I'm competing against the full force of all of the best Portuguese athletes when we're talking about these races.
Yep. Yeah, I always say if you can do well in an age group race in Boulder, you're probably going to do well in the national championship in the USA, right? So it depends where you come from. So,
Yeah.
But Lisbon sounds like it's a little bit of a hotbed of triathlon anyway.
Yeah,
So,
there's quite a lot of people outside of Lisbon anyway, a bit outside where it's not a little bit less traffic.
yeah. Oh, and they also have a great distance running history as well. So distance running is a big thing there too.
Yep.
So taking a step towards the philosophical, I think your contribution to the sport is absolutely incredible. You stimulate such great conversation. You bring on great guests. What do you think your legacy is that you are leaving and want to leave? What's your unique gift?
That is a very good question. I don't know if I have a unique gift necessarily, but I have some strengths and I have some weaknesses, and I'm quite aware of what both of those are. So, and I try to make the most of them, the strengths, of course, and I try to mitigate my weaknesses either by, in some cases, working with other people that know these things better than I do, and like in the case of, for example, aerodynamics that I'm doing right now, or just making them non-factors when it comes to my podcast, for example. Naturally, I set up a podcast that is suited to my strengths, which is more on the, let's say, boring side of things, educational rather than entertainment. Like I'm not going to have the most entertaining podcast necessarily, but I think it can be very educational. So I think that's what I would answer to that question.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you think people think you're a yes man, but when you answer with the term educational, right, it kind of speaks to your listeners, right? So I think people sign in because they want to learn, right? But it's extremely entertaining, and very often you will listen to a scientific type podcast and you get lost, right? Even if you out on a run or a walk or a bike ride, you kind of find yourself not rewinding, trying to listen to things, but that never happens with you. So I think that your gift definitely is, some part of that is definitely education. I think that answers that question brilliantly.
Yeah, and there's the one thing that is really cool, as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation as well, or Matt mentioned it, is that there's a lot of coaches listening and a lot of researchers listening. So these days it's actually quite common for me to reach out to a guest and they say, "Yeah, I've been listening to your podcast for years. I'm so excited to get on." And that is a thrilling feeling really for me when that happens.
Yeah. I've always found in triathlon, especially when you're working with age groupers, that you have a very smart community with average talent, right? So they didn't turn out to be the greatest swimmers or the greatest runners or the greatest bike riders, and they come to triathlon. But the intellectual level of triathletes always stuns me, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of beginners that find what you're talking about extremely interesting, but at the same time, that's not necessarily represented in their results in age group competition.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we're getting towards the end there, and I'm going to just ask you those final questions similar to what you asked your guests. But I just want to know if Matt has anything else that he wants to speak to, because this has been incredible, and we've already got to our time, our time conscription. But otherwise, Matt, anything you want to add to that?
Well, first, I want to say I think I've done a really good job about not interrupting in this podcast. I really wanted to be able to get Mikael's thoughts out. And so we decided, Bobby, you would lead these questions. I've been listening and learning a lot. Just wanted to say, first of all, there's the culture conversation and having those thoughts about how you pick guests and topics you talk about. In an age of more spews, more views, and deciding that you're going to go more of the educational route, that's personally why I'm a fan. And even when I am listening to a podcast of yours that I think, yeah, not as much of my interest, I know there's that 1% that's going to still come in that conversation that I need to know. And so I listen anyway, right? So I think you're doing a great job of doing that. And really, I just wanted to say that, you know, overall it's unfortunate, but I think with a lot of coaching, we have coaches that maybe have, again, potentially a lot of influence, not as much education. We have coaches that are highly, highly educated, but, you know, they don't really know how to transfer that over. So when you were talking before about how you still compete and at the same time, you are a coach first and then a podcaster, I just thought, you know, that's such a valuable piece of information for me, because I know over the years, it's been about understanding that I'm there to serve athletes. And that is the first objective, at least, you know, professionally. And then after that, I get to go out and have fun and see what I can do. But as far as competition goes, or as far as what I can achieve with my own personal goals, I've had to put that on the back burner, but still trying to practice what I preach as much as possible. And it's a tough balance. So just been interesting to hear from you how you try to balance that out, and, you know, what your expectations of yourself are as a coach and a person.
I don't have anything to add to that really, but I'm glad you found it useful.
Yeah, no, not really a question really, but just more, I appreciate that side of things. And I think that with coaches in general, it is a tough balance, and it is good to hear from people like yourselves on how you make this work. It's encouraging for me. So I thank you.
I think one thing actually that I now do want to follow up on that you said there is with, more spews, more views. I haven't heard that expression, but I think that is pretty reflective of the media climate today, and definitely something that I try to avoid, but to the detriment of my download numbers. And I'm sure you will experience the same with your podcast. But I think it's, for me, it's hard. It's always hard because you want to have more downloads, more views and everything. But then at the same time, I try to think about, well, it's really not about how many people listen to the podcast. It's about how much do they get out of it, really, and how much value does it bring the people that do listen to it. And I think that's reflected in the things like how many athletes we coach within scientific triathlon that have reached out to us through first learning about scientific triathlon through the podcast and have been with us for years and years. And the same thing with athletes come to the training camps that we run and so on. And just that sort of, that makes you see that you're having a real impact, even though the download numbers might not be the highest in the world.
Yeah. And I'll finish with this thought and I'll let Bobby finish up. But when you were talking about that, I was thinking how we don't need to have everyone listening to us, just like we don't need to have everyone following our programs. I think we do have a specific niche, and those people who are really interested in learning this information that we are trying to share, those are the ones that would benefit the most from the programs. And you said before how a lot of people get a lot out of the pre-scripted even programs that you can offer. And I think that's key to me, is I really am not trying to attract as many people as possible, because a lot of those people aren't interested in the details in, say, our run form programs, whereas somebody like yourself or your listeners, they certainly would geek out on that information and realize, wow, this is, 60 years of combined coaching going into one video. And I really appreciate what it took to get that information to me today. that's the person that I think we're trying to attract. So that's not everybody, that's a niche, but the people who are listening and do want to learn, I think they have that performance mindset. Like, I don't care what level they're at. And I think I heard that from you today, because I would say I'm about the same way, about 75% age groupers, about 25% more elite or professional in my career. And I love having my finger on the pulse through all of that, because there are so many beginners that I'm very proud to have served, and yet all the way up to a Ben Canute. So I'm very proud of that. And I think that that's a similar way of looking at things that you're doing things there. So yeah, absolutely love this conversation, and love to have you on again at some point. But yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, Bobby, you can finish off the podcast.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, Michael, I did my human movement studies with all European lecturers back in South Africa in the day. I had a Austrian guy who taught me anatomy, and I had a Dutch guy who was involved in a lot of the kinematic stuff that we learned. So it's interesting to me, that you chose the field that you chose. So instead of asking you about your coaching resources, your favorite coaching resources, what do you think influenced your coaching approach, your coaching style the most? Because we all came out of our classes having been intensely involved with these individuals for 3 years, and then we all coached like they coached us, until we developed our own style. What were your influences in that domain?
Yeah, I would actually say that that is my engineering background that has influenced my coaching. If I pick one thing, it is the engineering background, because I think that, or the way I think about coaching, I am systematic. Like, you have to be in engineering. If you're creating a sort of product like we did in the medical device industry, you start with thinking about the end goal. Okay, what does this device have to do? What are the things that can't go wrong? What are the safety, the guardrails you need to have in place? And if this device should do X, then how does it do that? What is the easiest way for you to achieve that? That requires the least energy, has the minimum risk of breakdown, so on. So basically, if you start with a goal, let's call it a 10-hour Ironman, then you break that down. What does that mean for the swim? What does that mean for the bike? What does that mean for the run? Then you break that down further. Okay, if we want to bike for 5 hours, 20 minutes, what power is that for this athlete, given their aerodynamic capacity and given the course? And you work backwards from that in the swim and the run, same kind of thing. And then when you have those parameters established, you try to come to a training prescription. So, or you of course you have to have a measure of where you are right now. So where are we at right now? I can hold X amount of watts for 5 hours 20, but I need to add 20 more watts to get to that goal bike split. So what do we need to do in training to get to that? And then you have your toolbox, which is the different training interventions, the different workouts, and so on. And a lot of what That Triathlon Show is about, and what the guests on the show talk about, and what I talk about, is the different tools in the toolbox. But then the challenge is trying to pick the right tool in the toolbox, and for that there's always a little bit of a lot of experience, a lot of pattern recognition, but there's a lot of trial and error in a way. But yeah, you have to just be monitoring and be very observant and have a good communication with the athlete. So but I think that the engineering background that I have is the biggest influence, because that's what allows me to have a pretty systematic approach to coaching, and I've built some systems and processes that I think work well. And then I'm really agnostic to the training philosophy, because for me those are just the different tools that I have at my disposal. But the engineering approach is what helps me prioritize. Okay, this athlete needs to work on the bike. They need to add this many watts. This athlete needs to work on the swim. This athlete needs to work on the run. And I know that because I've broken things down into smaller components, and then all the way until I get to the point where I need to really apply the training intervention.
You know what? I'm so glad I didn't call those rapid fire questions, because I needed that answer. That was fantastic. Well done, Michael. That's a perfect answer. Thank you. I remember Sebastian Coe's dad was an engineer as well, and he approached it from what he called first principles. And that's basically what you just said, use those first principles. All right, last question for me. Mentors. Have you had people that have greatly influenced you in your coaching?
There's lots of people. I don't think I would put out any single name. I had had my own coaches that have been very influential. Definitely, I would say that the coaches within scientific triathlon, they are very influential for me as well. I learn a lot from them, and we talk very regularly. I learn a lot from my athletes. I can't call them mentors necessarily because I'm coaching them, but I really learn a lot from them. I think in general, I just try to be very open-minded in every conversation I have with coaches, athletes, and academics, and learn something from everybody. So yeah, I don't think that I have any one or two or three people that I would call out and say that these are my mentors. But yeah, there's literally hundreds of people almost at this point, or there are, because that's the number of people I have interviewed. But it goes far beyond the people I have interviewed, and the more influential one are certainly the ones that I have had more regular contact with, like my own coaches and training partners and athletes and my colleagues within scientific triathlon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. So I'm wishing you, as a closing, for a work-life balance, that there'll be more beaches, more nature, more surfing, and more time with your fiance, soon-to-be wife. Thank you so much for coming on our show. I think that was fantastic. Loved every moment of it, and really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I had a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you both as well, and everything that you're doing. And I'm really excited for your podcast, and I'm going to be a very regular listener for sure.
As always, thanks for listening to the Run Form podcast. And as a reminder, we offer a totally free movement improvement assessment on our Pendola Project website. Here, you can get your own personalized protocol that will help your running today, so give that a try. Also, Bobby and I are experts on Any Question app, where you can ask us, any question, so reach out to us directly there. Finally, if you learned anything new today, don't forget to share it with your compadres and leave us a quick review. That really helps us a lot. All the links you need are in the show notes below. Till next time, have a great run. Oh, that was awesome. Yeah.